The one thing that I find interesting about drones, especially in terms of near future or even present day stuff, is that the technology is so advanced right now that in a way that most people aren't aware of, that when they read it in modern day fiction, they're like, this is science fiction. And the greatest example of that right now is Mark Greeny's recent book, where a lot of people are saying this is more science fiction than actual, like what he normally writes, which is just mainstream kind of modern day spy action thriller, because he has an AI controlling weaponized drones.
Troopers fall through an endless sky. Military sound and science fiction contest. We enter the system on fire. Military sound and science fiction contest. Stories every Wednesday. Military sound and fiction contest. Discussion, interviews, reviews, and events. Military science, science fiction contest.
Today we're talking about drones. And for Rick, that means droning on and on and on. For Josh and I, it means let's talk about tech. No, that's not true. Rick made that joke, and I made it before he could make it. So
I wasn't going to make it again.
You
It
were
wasn't
going
for
to make
public
it again.
consumption.
So the thing that prompted this was the latest conflict in Israel, when Iran launched a whole bunch of projectiles and also supposedly some drones at Israel. But there is also a whole lot of technological advancement, I guess we could say, happening in drone warfare on the mechanized and infantry front in Ukraine. And it's an interesting topic. Like I've used drones a lot in AN 14. And Rick, have you used drones that much in your series?
I use like observation drones.
Mm-hmm.
In most of my universes, armed drones aren't practical because of the electronic warfare capabilities, because I don't want armed drones in my universes.
Well, and that's one of the conceits with AN 14 is like it's an AI, AI. And so if you have AI, why wouldn't you have drones and the ability to replicate, thousands of things? But then the question becomes, how do you defeat drones? But I think if we keep it to near future for this conversation, that might be, unfortunately, Jeff couldn't be here, and Jeff really wanted to talk about the most recent spate of drones. But I don't know. Why don't we go there? Why do you not want to use drones?
It's an authorial thing, it's people like to have a stake in a story. They want characters who have skin in the game. And if you're sitting in a control room 10,000 miles away from the action controlling a drone, I don't want to read about that, and neither does anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Drones are useful as like for me in my books is like showing you what's going on in one place or another, like reconnaissance drones. But I make a point in almost all my universes that I think is going to be echoed in real life, because it's already been echoed in simulations, that if you put AI in charge of autonomous drones, eventually they're going to kill either your own people or innocent civilians in droves, and then they're going to get outlawed. And the only people who use them will be states that will have an excuse to invade them because they use them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's interesting. I use drones, and in the two main series that I've written, Weaponized that I'm writing now, and in Valor, I used kind of a similar approach where, like Rick was talking about observation drones, I have micro drones, and you mentioned near future, and I want to touch on that in a second. Mine's kind of far future ish, and so mine are I envision mine like little hovering orbs almost, and my characters can control them through a internal computer system kind of implant thing that they have with their thoughts and can it's like send instructions, and they're also semi autonomous. And so you can deploy them and let them orbit around you or like focus on a specific target. They also have like a whole bunch of like what I call deep scan technology where you can see like another person's implants or see like what kind of weapon they have and all that kind of stuff. Um, uh, I haven't used them so much as weapons per se, even though I do have different devices that they can use that are still controlled and it's still semi-autonomous that act as weapons like grenades and stuff like that. But I don't have my drones like armed, if you want to say that, with like pulse weapons or laser beams or anything like that. The one thing that I find interesting about drones, especially in terms of near future or even present day stuff, is that the technology is so advanced right now that in a way that most people aren't aware of, that when they read it in modern day fiction they're like, this is science fiction. And the greatest example of that right now is Mark Greeny's recent book, where a lot of people are saying this is more science fiction than actual like what he normally writes, which is just mainstream kind of modern day spy action thriller, because he has an AI controlling weaponized drones, either the quadruped drones like the dog thing. There's a video going around with the flamethrower deal. Yeah, that was in his book. Of course they had
Did the dog have a
automatic.
flamethrower in his book?
No, they had basically like M40s, I think. Not M40s, 249s, like a squad automatic weapon
Oh,
almost,
saws.
mounted on his yeah,
Yeah.
but it was the high caliber version. I think that's the
Oh,
240.
the 240. Yeah, the
Yeah.
240.
And then he also had like swarms of smaller drones that were like quadcopter-ish that they some were observation and some were like they had explosives mounted on them and that kind of thing. And that is very real. Those things exist. They are used. Um, and I think it's funny that a lot of people are like, this is science fiction. This doesn't happen. I'm like, no, it's happening right now. But also, like Rick, you mentioned not having characters operating drones because of the inability to be in the action per se. And to one of the books that I've read recently, which I can't remember if it was Tier One or another series, but the drone operator, um, he he was kind of blackmailed into doing different things, and he had to deal with some kind of PTSD adjacent stuff where they like accidentally killed civilians and that kind of thing. And so if you're approaching it from the aspect of using the drone to uh highlight some flaws or some dramatic situation in a character, I think that's cool. But like I agree with Rick, having a character that all they're doing is flying a drone somewhere and they're not really in any real danger, that I think that kind of takes the agency away from the character and makes it less interesting.
I think the biggest, like, what the drones can do for you. I'm just thinking through some of the like the situation around the space battles that I ended up writing that used drones. Like
What
it
can
was
drone do for you?
what's that?
What can drone do for you?
What can a drone do for you? Well, we've talked about space battle and like how space battle might actually work. And like one of the conceits of if we're imagining like a relatively close, high density spaceport with a lot of activity and um the AI, which also has some humanizing aspects to the AI to make it more relatable. The drones, basically, what that allows that character to do is jump around to different locations simultaneously, and typically balancing that with human characters so that the human characters are in danger, and drones are a good way, like if you have a drone swarm, to put pressure on the human characters. So I'm trying to think, like, I think everything you're saying is important to consider. Like, what are the stakes, and are drones lessening the stakes? Because it doesn't matter if a drone gets
Well,
killed. I mean, in most cases, I
just on,
used what's that?
I was gonna say, just on a practical level,
Uh-huh.
you're not leaving aside the whole dramatic authorial thing. On a practical level, um, remotely piloted drones are very susceptible to electronic warfare. I
Mhm.
mean, signal jamming gets better all the time. We keep fighting that. We keep, doing leapfrogs like with armor, like tanks and the anti-tank missiles, but at some points in the future, maybe not every point, but at some points, you're not going to be able to remotely pilot a vehicle
Right.
because of electronic warfare. Um, on the other side of that, with autonomous drones, I don't know. It was I think a year, 2 years ago, something like that, when the Air Force ran a simulation, like just a computer simulation with an AI, asking it to accomplish this mission. And in this simulation, this is not like, people on the ground. This is just in a computer, but it decided that the quickest way for it to get to the enemy was through its own people. And it wound up in the simulation killing a bunch of friendlies to get the mission accomplished. Um, like I said, this is just in a computer. Never. It wasn't like they were out there with even blanks or anything. Or it's all, just computer simulation. But that's how AI think, and teaching them uh, the complex moral calculus of when people are going to die in a mission and it's just something you accept versus I'm sacrificing them in a cold and calculating way and a person wouldn't do this. I think that's going to be really, really hard because we're nowhere near as close to like a human thinking AI as we think it's some people think we are. So it's gonna be like one of those old stories where you're trying to make a wish to a genie, and the genie keeps
Or the
giving
monkey.
you
The monkey's claw.
yeah, they keep like reading your wish in the worst way possible.
Yeah.
One
I
of the
think
gr-
that
I think one
I
of the
remember that article, and I feel like that was a they I won't say they did it on purpose, but they didn't put the right things in place. Like I think if you look at if we're talking about AI or
That's
drone
the thing. I'm
controlled
not sure
AI,
you can make the right
well,
things in place
but
with
humans
something that
don't.
takes you so literally.
But humans don't like humans make terrible decisions when it comes to friendly fire as well. So
True.
if you can have some kind of I think that's the problem is like if you always have a place where humans are going to interpret what the sensor data is seeing, even if the AI. I mean, I think you're right. You can go both ways. Like it's only as good as the human programmers that set it up to read that data. And if you tell them not to, we put transponders in all the good guys, but then we jam the transponders. Um, you're right. There's always an escalation there.
Or what if there are civilians,
Right.
non-combatants in the area that you didn't know were there?
And it just
And
stop. What if the thing
it,
just
it
shuts down because there's
or if it doesn't register them as
right.
non-combatants because nobody programmed it to know, hey, there are non-combatants here, avoid shooting them because they weren't supposed to be there. And then there's a bunch of kids there and they get killed because there was no human that could control. And we're talking like somebody reading this from afar, but if you have an autonomous drone, there's probably not going to be that option.
Yeah. I mean, there's
it
arguments
reminds
right
me
now
of
that
the
What were you saying, Joe? Josh?
I was gonna say that the whole kind of area that we're talking about right now, it reminds, and I know this is more kind of like an AI type situation than a drone situation, but it reminds me of the movie War Games,
Mhm.
where the computer, the Whopper, is he doesn't see the problem
Right.
with the nuclear war, and then he starts running all these simulations at the end of the movie and basically like overwhelms the thing, and there's a whole bunch of but basically he comes to the right conclusion, which is there's not going to be any winner in a nuclear war. But it
That's
took him.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it took the computer. It was forced into having to make that assumption on its own, because it didn't understand why everybody was telling it, and so it just started running the simulations, and then came to a logical conclusion that it didn't matter how he started it, didn't matter who fired second or third or fourth, or who went through like all the options of everybody, and came to the conclusion no one would win. And that the argument of whether or not an AI controlled drone can make that determination without the experience, right? Like without the, is we're not, humans, we don't think in terms like that for the most part. And yeah, you're right, we do make friendly fire decisions, but a lot of times most of the decisions we make are like the one of the limiting factors is, can we go in here and do this and then survive?
Mhm.
And in a drone, that it's not, surviving isn't part of the equation. It's just
Well,
it's just
I also read, this is not the military. This was one of these private AI things. There's so many of them going on. But
mhm.
somebody ran scenarios for, military situations through one of these civilian AIs just to see what strategies it would come up with. And every single time it wound up launching nuclear weapons.
Well,
Nice.
I mean, it's hard to comment on what's happening in Israel right now, although I have seen stories that AI, like I think it's Palantir, is providing support to the IDF for battlefield decision making using AI. And that might be one of the things that led to that NGO group getting attacked. It was providing targeting data to a human who had to make the fire decision, but they don't know, like there were a number of factors, just like with a self-driving vehicle, where it can't recognize certain things, that certain things happened around that convoy which indicated a hostile, and then the human that was supposed to verify didn't do it like they were supposed to. So I think as part of this conversation, like we can all see, like this is kind of a theme that we've talked about before, is that you can have cool whiz bang technology, but it's always going to be limited by, you know, time, terrain, the Met T factor that comes into play, and the enemy. And so a drone, like looking at the ways that we even think now that drones, just like we're discussing, when you think about the story, okay, I have all these drone tools I could use, but there's still always going to be something that makes it not work the way it's sold to work. And even in the midst of, we're in this time right now where all of these capabilities are being sold, that, it'll do all these great things so that your, exhausted commanders on the ground can make better decisions. And on paper, you would think it would do that, but it doesn't, because it's a very complex environment, and it won't always just be the enemy. It could be NGOs, it could be civilians, it could be, a dog wanders into the battlefield, and are we going to kill the dog? Thinking about, and even like the long-term
You
effects of,
never
say,
kill the dog,
don't kill the
James.
dog.
It's a good way to lose your audience.
I mean, you're going to lose your audience. And Afghanistan, like you think about the political effects of, like, one of the reasons people, as things progressed in Afghanistan and we pulled out ground troops and moved to drone operations, and, that's where a lot of the AI that we're seeing now is coming, that data came from Afghanistan, where they analyzed what people were doing on the ground and used that to make targeting decisions. But the long-term effects of that was that the on the ground Afghanis, they already didn't like us for, there are plenty of reasons for them to dislike us, but now we're just like God in the sky killing people. Now they really, really hate us. So those are like long-term things to think about, the effects of this kind of technology and what that means for your story. I mean, the other thing
Well, and you're always going to have technology that counters
right.
the advanced technology, and that's like in weaponized, we have these implants that basically turn your brain into kind of a multitasking semi-autonomous computer, not
Mhm.
really an AI, because it's not thinking for itself, but it's implanted at birth, and so the system, the it's not an AI, but basically the intelligence there learns how the person thinks and operates and does things, and then can anticipate requests and actions, and can kind of, it's like this, it's like breathing, right? Like you don't have to think about breathing, it just does it,
Mhm.
right? But there's also the counter to that, which are what I call inhibitor callers, which are these things that can just deactivate that, right? So it's not that they're superhuman, they are kind of advanced, but there's a shutdown to that. You can completely like just remove that ability for that person to access the capabilities of the implant. And so there's always going to be like a counter or a limitation on advanced technology. And one of the reasons that I don't specifically like the drone thing is that a lot of times I've read it where it becomes a superhuman thing, and you can't stop it, and there's no counter to it. And in even in modern day, you see every piece of advanced technology that comes out that is the next big thing. 2 weeks later, there's a counter to it, and it becomes ineffective.
It doesn't eat, it
And
doesn't rest. It won't
yeah,
stop until it kills us all.
well, it's like that's like one of my biggest my biggest dislikes of the Star Wars universe is the Clone Wars, because first of all, like why do like you have clones and then you have droids, and like why do I care about either of those two armies? Right?
Yeah.
Because you're just going to make more drones and you're going to make more droids. There's nothing personal about that. I mean, if you're going up against some kind of advanced alien race or some kind of robot army or something, okay, if they're the enemy, but you have to have like the focus of your story that they've got to be capable of taking loss and dealing with those kind of things. And so
What's
I
the
wouldn't
human aspect?
put, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, to me,
Yeah,
that's one of the
getting back-
biggest letdowns of the last Star Wars series was like Finn was set up to be like, oh, cool, a stormtrooper that's going to be a human, and then they just like dumped that whole story. That
Right.
yeah,
Getting back to the whole autonomous thing in AI, I don't know if you probably haven't. This is an old story, which makes it more prescient even. There's an old short story called Watchbird. And the concept of it was autonomous drones powered by AI, an AI system. And the idea was they were going to stop murder in the world. They were programmed to not let anybody harm anybody else. But the problem was they used a learning AI in them. And the learning AI deduced, well, what do I think is harm? So first it started doing things that were a little over the edge, like stopping boxing matches and things like that. But then it decided that all living things needed protection, so it wouldn't let anybody eat anymore. And then it decided that crops were living things, so it wouldn't let you plow a field. And then it decided that turning off machines was killing a living thing because it was a machine. So it wouldn't let people turn off their tractors or their cars. So it was bringing society to a halt. So they decided, well, we're going to get rid of it. So we're going to make these things that I can't forget what they call, like raptors or something, and they were designed to destroy the watchbirds, but they made the mistake of using that same AI on them. So once they killed the watchbirds, they're like, what else can I kill?
Nice.
author
And
is Robert Sheckley, and it's on Project Gutenberg. You can read it for free. But
Yeah.
this also sounds like Philip Dick, like the
I was going to say,
what's
it reminds me of iRobot.
well, iRobot
What's
too.
the story called?
Well, there's the Philip Dick story. The new, what is it? The new type or the new version? Like it's basically about different versions of AI. It's the one that became the idea of the Terminator, I think.
Well, I think that's the problem. The problem with AI is we are nowhere near. I don't say we don't know. We don't understand enough about how a human brain thinks,
Right.
to make something else that
Right.
thinks.
Well, and that's
That's the
even
problem.
thinking
People
like we
think,
kind of went down the road on AI, but to pull it back to like say what's happening in Ukraine, like a lot of the way drones are being used is human operators. I mean, they're close to the front, but they're doing FPV, first person view
oh yeah,
drones. And that's what they're using to drop grenades. But then how are the Russians like have you seen those pictures of the tanks with like it looks like a stupid tin shack on the outside of the tank, but that's the countermeasure just to create distance between the grenade and the actual body of the tank. But I guess
that's the thing.
or-
Countermeasures to remotely piloted armed drones are too easy.
yeah,
I mean, if you have two kind of primitive, like late 20th century technology armies fighting each other, and one of them starts using drones, yeah, they'll have an edge for a while, but it's too easy to make countermeasures against drones. You can rig up shotguns to take down drones,
Right.
and it's not something that's going to win a war for you.
Hmm.
It's more, I mean, it's more along the lines of a terrorist weapon if you look at it.
Yeah.
Not that the way they're doing it's an army is terrorism, but I mean it would be more effective targeting civilians. And they're probably going to start doing that, if they haven't already.
Well, that's always been. I mean, as soon as a quadcopter could carry like a can of Coke, it's like, oh man, so we could fly that into a stadium. Um, and I saw it. I got a presentation from DJI at one point, which was really interesting what they could see on the back end. They make DJI as the largest drone producer in China, but that's why I've never bought a DJI drone, is because they basically had the ability to see like the location of every drone in our area. This was around the stadium for stadium security. And so you could basically apply a geofence that if any drone hit that fence, it would just stop. Um, but the data they had on the users was really interesting. That's like a whole other tangent here. But the off the shelf tech on if you wanted to, an explosive or a dirty device or something like that, like the ability to deliver that has gotten so much easier that I think we're just fortunate nobody has done it at this point.
For sure.
Well, they're very watchful for that kind of thing at stadiums, from what I understand.
Well, that's a whole other conversation we could have. I mean, there's a CBD, chemical biological warfare team, at least in my state, that they can, but there's only so many of them. So if you're going to have a major event, you can ask for that resource, but you might not get it depending on what's happening in the rest of the state. And then, so this was all tied to the other thing is that anytime there's a medical facility that gets rid of something they don't ever really get rid of like gamma devices or gamma knives or things that use cesium and stuff like that. Like they're very available if people know where to look. And so there's a whole other conversation, but the ability to get devices to deliver radiological material is something that a drone is very well suited to do. And you can be far enough away from it that you can deliver it. And if somebody's stupid and uses an off-the-shelf drone, but it's also it's not that difficult to build a drone on your own. Like the tools are all out there to do it if you want to.
For sure.
So I mean, that's another use of drones that we haven't necessarily even talked about, would be a delivery mechanism. This kind of gets back to the Iran's attack on Israel, but that how are we countering like a mass delivery? And really that's an extension of like a missile attack, because one of the sort of doctrines of missile attack would be, how do we overwhelm the enemy's air defense capabilities? Missiles are cheap, air defense is expensive. And so that's one of the aspects of drone warfare, is that yes, it could be AI controlled, or they're just dumb delivery systems that overwhelm a defender's ability to protect against it. And yeah, electronic warfare is certainly an aspect of that. But you might not have it. So, I mean, those are all things to think about. I think that one of the themes of what we're going through here is that if you're going to use something like a drone or that technology, and you have a countermeasure, like that's what makes it an interesting story, is that not all countermeasures are 100% effective, and not everybody can buy 1,000 drones. But if you have 200 drones, what do you do with them? And that's the characters thinking through that and making, either defending against it or using it as an attack is what is the interesting part of the story. To me anyway.
One of the books that I've read recently, it was a modern day military thriller, and they used these swarm type drones that could map out the layout of a building and pinpoint where the enemy combatants were. And I mean, obviously the limitation of that is, how do you receive that information? And for them, it was an iPad and whatever else. But that, just having that capability didn't make the situation like it's in the pocket, right? So because they still had to deal with the engagement, they still had to go in and do the thing, and then they ended up winning overall, but they lost a couple of gunfights in between, even having all of that information. And so one of the things that I like try to make sure that I do is, if I'm using like a drone technology or some adjacent of that, making sure that that is not making any situation that I go into uh a a a just dismissing, like it's done. It's what
Right.
we wanted
Not
because
an
we
easy
have
button.
these drones. And yeah, it's not easy button. And I also, one of the things that I've found in writing weaponized is in using drones, trying to imagine what a person or society would, like how it affects everyday life. If you have these, like in my series, you have these micro drones that people can use. My character has these cybernetic legs that have like different compartments and stuff in them, and that's where he houses these devices, and he can deploy them from there. But how does that affect life in a way that people would just see as normal, right? They wouldn't. This isn't a special thing, and so trying to incorporate those aspects of uh, how these things interact with your characters, especially if it's a far future, and it's a completely different thing. Um, receiving the information, they've got these what I call optics, but it's basically like an augmented reality like overlay on your vision. You can see different things. Um, one of the things, even with the augmented vision and even with the drones, is that if you're in combat and you're receiving this information, it's very easy to get into an overload state where you're receiving visual information from, let's say, a half a dozen drones. Some of them are visual feeds, maybe others are just like content warnings or something like that. A person still has to ingest that information, and if
Mhm.
they're in the middle of a firefight, having a view from a drone in your visual field will definitely inhibit your ability to engage the enemy physically, like shooting guns and moving and all of that. I mean, I remember wearing the old night vision, the PV PVS sevens,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And PBL
and
settings.
yeah, and even without having anything in my vision, just that the diminished visual field, the different perspective that it was at, it was hard to run in those things,
Yeah.
especially if you're running over uneven ground. And so, like, I try to extrapolate something like that and say, even if you have access to all this information, you might not be able to use it the way that you think you can use. It's not going to, like we said before, it's not going to be an easy button because you still have a human that is dealing with human limitations,
Mhm.
regardless of how advanced the drone technology or even the receiving technology is.
When I
Well,
was,
that's the thing with, let's say that's the thing with most of futuristic military science fiction is that I've dealt with, and some people don't bother, but uh, you're going to be getting so much information
right.
that it processing it and using it in the battlefield is going to be, it's going to be an art form all to itself, and there's not going to be a lot
Mhm.
of people who can manage it. Um, so I've gotten some ideas where um, you have kind of an augmented reality that you see that takes all that information automatically and just makes it pictures. Like if there's people over here, well, you see those people like as people, not you don't see like the raw data. And
Oh yeah, right. Okay.
it tries to make it as simple as possible, but it's still something where that gets a lot of people killed in my books is not being able to process everything they're taking in.
I did
I
a,
like the idea that you. Sorry, James. Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I kind of lived through this a little bit where Raytheon was doing a test of a new display for Patriot. And, when I came up, it was, basically a gray green with white. Everything was in white. And we were testing the ability to make decisions with color. Um, and color actually made it harder because you had to determine, like if you looked at an icon, if it was white, that's all you had to process was the icon and where the icon was and what it was doing. If it was a different color, now you had to think about all this other, and just that one little bit of information made it harder. It made it feel a little bit more overwhelming. And I mean, at the time they hadn't decided. So actually, I don't know what they have now. I wouldn't, seems like it would have to be color at this point, but that was really interesting to me that they had, even back then, they were like it was overwhelming to add, it became overwhelming to just even add that little bit more of information that your brain, that's forcing your brain to make more decisions than it has to make if it's just trying to process this bit. But I think that's kind of a scary thing now. Like getting back to what you're talking about, Rick, I could see AI companies being, I mean, they're doing it now. Palantir is providing this information where AI is the abstraction layer that provides the, the happy pictures. So then the human can decide if they're going to shoot or not.
And of
But
course, at
then,
that point, you have to worry whether it's lying to you.
yeah, can you trust it?
I mean, not even on purpose. It could be the enemy using some kind of masking because they know what the AI is looking for, so they can make their soldier look like a civilian, and the AI won't be able to tell the difference, but it'll make him hesitate long enough for him to get killed.
Mm-hmm. So
one
the
of the
drone,
things I did in Valor,
yeah, go ahead.
Was with drones specifically is that I, instead of having everybody receive the information at the same time, I had like a drone operator, and they were the ones that were in charge of controlling and receiving the information. So it was almost like the separation of radio channels where you've got like the command net and attack net and the squad net and all that stuff. And there's a radio operator that is monitoring, and he can switch channels and do all that. So having the information doesn't necessarily make it overpowered, because you've got to have some way to disseminate it. And if you've got one person who's receiving the information, it still takes them time to receive the information and then translate and transmit the information to the rest of the squad. And that creates a very significant dramatic effect almost when you're trying to get the information out, but like the squad radio channel is busy and you can't get the information out. Like I like those kind of things rather than it just answering, making the battle easy, basically.
Right.
And I've said it already, but that it's one of the themes that I try to go to when I create technology, or I'm creating situations, is I want to make them as difficult as possible for my characters. And
think back to like classic, I mean, it feels like that's almost a trope in any Vietnam firefight story, is that the radio operator is going to get shot, and now somebody's got to grab the radio, or anybody grabs a weapon. Like, okay, the M60 gunner just got shot. Now somebody who's not familiar with the weapon needs to pick it up and use it. Like, it's that you've got new technology, the technology provides a capability, but it's only as good as the training and your access to it. And then, when we're writing a story, like when we want to raise the stakes, like that's always a good way to set things up. Like you could have the slick salesperson who sold the thing, selling it to a general or whatever, and then we get it to the unit, and it's like, this is going to solve all your problems. And then you get in the firefight and realize that, no, actually it sucks. And here's all the way that, we're going to figure out that it sucks.
Right.
So, I mean, that's kind of classic, but that's very much a military, like the way things actually happen, that. Rick, we lost you for a second. Did you come back?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, I mean, you do have to make things difficult as a writer, but you also have to take into account that if something's not new, then there will be people who've faced this difficulty before, and they'll have like either try to fix it, or they'll have some kind of training to get around it. But getting back to drones that aren't armed and aren't controlled by AI, though, I think that can come in handy both on a practical level and as writing military science fiction, in the idea that you can get a more complete picture of the battlefield, and not just so that like the characters can know what they got to do, but so that the reader can have an idea. Okay, this is where the good guys are, the bad guys are over here, and this is the terrain they have to go across. Because that's always difficult for me when writing combat scenes, because in combat nowadays, you're going across this area, you may not know what's over here. You don't know who's behind that building. You don't know where the fire is coming from. That's a big thing. You almost never know immediately who's shooting at you or where from. If you have drones out that can give you a better picture of where the bad guys can be, it also gives the readers a picture of where things are. So Also,
Uh,
another thing that I really like as a dramatic effect is when you're out there like on patrolling and you have the drones out and the drones go black. And that's
Yeah.
like, oh
yes.
shoot, we're gonna get ambushed right now.
Mhm.
I do that in the one of the in the opening chapters of Weaponized. They're using these uh advanced drones, and they've all got advanced armor and weapons and all of this, and then right as the battle kicks off they lose everything. And it really throws the chaotic, because like you said, they're going to be used to using these things, so how do they operate without them? It's the funny meme about people in red dot sights and iron sights, right? Like if your holographic optics are great, but what happens when your battery dies, or what happens if it breaks, or something like that? Then you've got to go back to iron sights. I suck at shooting iron sights. I'll be the first one to admit it. I can't shoot iron sights on an M4 to save my life, but give me a red dot, I'm good.
Mhm.
I
I'll
was just
learn with
thinking,
iron sights. I just can't see them as well anymore.
yeah, that's the
Right,
thing. I only ever had like, please let my zero be right. I dropped the weapon a couple times. Um,
right.
and one
Two
thing I was
clicks
just
to the
thinking
left.
about, like with when people have had like our like tendency to humanize the things that we have, right? And like drones, I haven't seen it a whole lot, but I was just thinking about like a drone operator who has their drones, like of course they'd have names, or of course they'd think each one has a quirk or something, and that's a way you can kind of play with the reader's emotions a little bit, as if the weirdo radio operator or drone operator, like, oh man, I just lost A64, I love that one, and boom, it went out.
Yeah.
Now you've added a little bit of humanizing to it. But I mean, there probably are ways, because we've said that like it can lessen stakes with a drone, but I think there are ways that you could add a little humanizing to that will make the reader at least feel something when the drone goes down. Um, and now the
Oh,
stakes
the
have
the
gone
best
up.
example of that I can think of is Rogue One,
Oh
and the
yeah,
the
yep.
robot in Rogue One. And of course, droids are a thing, right? C-3PO and R2-D2 and all of that. But I mean, this robot didn't have any like agency before the movie. Like nobody knew who he was or anything like that. And they really did a really good job of making him a key character. And then when he goes off, and it has that emotional resonance because we've
Mhm.
identified with that character. And yeah, it's a robot, it's a droid, it wasn't human, but they were still able to create a situation where people cared about that human, like R2-D2 and all of that. And yeah, I think if you're going to go that route, that gives great breadth to a story, to have that kind of thing in there where you're humanizing these otherwise inhuman characters to make their interactions or their actions in the book more relevant.
Mhm. All right, we have 2 minutes left. Is there anything that we have not touched on when it comes to drones that we should have? Sounds like I'm hearing a lot of similar themes when it comes to introducing new tech in any given
I
story.
would really like to I would really like to read a book that a book that can do like drone combat well. And I don't mean like drone assisted combat, but like drone combat where the drones are the ones doing the fighting, and see how it can be done well. Because I can't think off the top of my head that I've actually read one where
There
the
was one that I read by Michael Stackpole called War Strider, I believe it was.
okay.
Uh, it was kind of like that. It's like the late 90s, so it's been a long time, so I don't remember everything about it. But it did it pretty well up to a certain point. But I don't tend to like those books. I mean,
Yeah.
I like things more old fashioned when it comes to it.
Yeah, for
Read
sure.
for a science fiction author, but if I can come up with a excuse, or the author I'm reading come up with an excuse why there are no drones at all, I'm happy with that too.
Yeah.
Well, it's
Because
all
as a
about the
reader,
human. Yeah, how are you going to get the reader to feel something? And it's
uh,
hard to. I think that's a really good point. It's hard to do that with a drone, especially like self-replicating, or if there's no cost to making the drones. If you're just fighting wave after wave of drones, like how is that? That's
Right.
depressing. How are you going to win?
Yeah, no joke.
Was it War Strider? I'm trying to find.
Yeah, War Strider.
Huh? It's not popping up on
Or it
Amazon.
might be William H. Keith. I can't. Let me look.
There's
Yeah,
an
here it
Ian
is.
Douglas.
Oh, well, then I got the wrong title.
I think
I
using
must have mixed them up. It was not Ian Douglas. Let
Hmm.
me look up William H. It was William H. Keith, not Michael Stackpole.
Oh, okay.
But they both wrote BattleTech novels, which is why I got them mixed up.
Ah,
I do think though that using drones or robots as like antagonists, if you will, to the story, I think that that's on a certain level that's okay. And what I mean by that is
Cylons.
well, Cylons, but like the Terminators.
mhm.
Um, I that it's the antagonist, and we don't care about that, but we care about the humans surviving it.
Right.
And that's fun because the humans have to come up with ways to um defeat it.
I feel like it ties into a pretty basic fear we have about technology in general, right? Like being an overwhelming force that's inhuman that we can't fight. And so how, I think it's pretty high stakes depending on what people are going up against. But I also think like one of the things we've talked about is like that seems like an easy button for the enemy. And so how are you going to like have that hit reality when the drones are really like hitting the environment or things of that nature.
Okay, you
For
want
sure.
to know something interesting?
Yeah.
There's two different War Strider series, one by Ian Douglas and one by William H. Keith. The one by William H. Keith is not in print anymore,
Yeah.
and it's not on Kindle. That's why you're having a hard time finding it.
I can only
But
find
it's,
one, Rebellion War Strider.
yeah, but there was that's the second volume, and there was I think four. I can't remember, but yeah, definitely is a thing. I probably have it somewhere over here in my bookcase.
I think I
And
still have one of your books that you've lent me, Rick, somewhere.
You should have
Yeah.
too. The
Mark Sumner.
yeah, Devil's Engine and Devil's Tower.
Yeah, I still have them. I don't think I've read them yet, actually.
whenever whenever I'm feeling down about writing, I just think about the fact that like there are a whole lot of like mid 90s or even late 80s authors that like sold a book, came out mass paperback, and then now you just can't find it to save your life. And
Yeah.
I just imagine those conversations like, yeah, I wrote a book. Oh yeah, where can I find it? I don't know.
That's why I still buy a lot of actual physical books.
Mhm.
More so just so I could put them on the shelf, but also if an EMP ever knocks out the AMS servers, I didn't lose all my stuff. I will lose like probably hundreds and hundreds of hours of movies because all of my movies I have on digital on Amazon, but
Yeah.
that'll be
No,
another
that's
problem.
I have some DVDs. I did not until recently. I bought like a $25 DVD player from Walmart, and I just have movies and TV shows that were never released on digital on DVD.
Well, it's funny
Like
because
I recently ordered both seasons of Millennium, or sorry,
Millennium.
the first two seasons of Millennium, because they're not on streaming anywhere.
well, Blu-rays are hitting our local thrift stores for like $4 a piece. So I've been snatching those up.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
But we're going through the wave. I mean, it's eventually they'll disappear and then all the prices will go up again.
Hmm.
Millennium. I haven't heard of that one.
Oh, it was by the creators of the X-Files. Came
Oh,
out
okay.
at
Oh,
the
I
same
remember
time.
that. Yeah, I do remember that show.
Isn't that
Guy who
Lance?
played-
What's his face?
The guy who played the android from Aliens is the main character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Henderson? Lance Henderson?
Lance Henriksen. Yeah.
All right. So this has been a good conversation about drones. I think that it's all over the place because it's tech that I think we're still not sure about. So like if you want to get out there and write that great drone story that Josh is looking for, let us know
Yes.
about it. Let us know what you think in the Discord. Because this is it's an evolving tech, and so it's really interesting to I think try to imagine how humans will deal with it, and how
For sure.
it's happening right now. So hit us up in the Discord. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time. Later.
Later.
Lone up troopers on the hit and jump gate. Military sanitation project.